Okay. My name's Kim Stewart, and I've been at 4ZZZ for getting close to 2 decades now. I'm on the board of 4ZZZ. I've also produced a lot of shows, and I was really enjoying the speakers this morning talking about community produced media, because that's pretty much what I've done all of my media career. I'm also a doctoral student at QUT, and I'm a sexual assault support worker, so I'm a social worker. And when I became a social worker, I thought, you know, I like this, it's really nice, but there's these people who have great stories to tell and need a way to be included in the voices of the community. And so it just seemed natural that I could put my two loves together in the form of this project which I've been running, the Ability Radio Project. So today we're going to hear a little bit from me, but mostly I'm hoping to hear from Caroline and Kate at the end there, who are from Making Airwaves. They come out of Sydney and they produce radio shows with people with intellectual disabilities. And we've got Helen Gwilliam, who's from 3CR, and people might know her. She seems like she's been doing a lot of work, a lot of radio work. And we've got Bernadette Young from the ABC, who was the facilitator of the Community Correspondence program, which I particularly picked out Bernadette because I was hoping that she might give us some really good ideas on how to get people from the community involved when it's difficult for them to come to the station. So why do we need to do this? If you're here today, I presume that I don't need to tell you that, because there's so little media that does justice to people with disabilities or represents their interests. There's so little research on it, and what is out there in the mainstream media anyway is very biased and tends to represent people in very superficial ways. I guess it's getting slightly better. There are a few good shows around on TV that are doing that. And obviously community radio is the only place where people are really getting a democratic voice. So these pictures you're looking at here are some of the radio projects that people here today have been doing. I didn't get any from Helen, sorry Helen. You can see my radio group at the top there, the lady with the microphone in her mouth, and the two bottom ones, and there's Bernadette with one of my students there. She's got the 612 t-shirt on. And Making Airwaves, that big group at the top, that's one of their early groups. They've done a number of groups now, so we'll hear about that later on in the show. You can tell I'm on radio. So this is my project, the Ability Radio Project. I just pulled the name out of the air. I didn't have anyone to talk to about before it started, and it was all very experimental. I had already been working with the Community Living Association, which is an organisation in Brisbane that works with people with intellectual disabilities, and I now work as a counsellor at Wild Sexual Violence Project, which is also people with intellectual disabilities who have been the victims of sexual assault. And I got together with a support worker from CLA, and we thought, let's do this, because we had one person who had done a lot of radio training. He had some mental health issues and vision impairment, but loved radio and had done all sorts of radio. He'd done some training at 4AAA in Brisbane, and he was also really into ham radio. And he was kind of our expert that inspired us to start this group. So we ran our first group beginning of last year, and we did 14 weeks of training with people with intellectual disabilities, just testing the ground to see what they wanted to do, what they were good at, and how much work we would have to do ourselves to support their programs to get to air. And it turned out I had to do quite a lot of editing. But fortunately, I really like editing. And we made the series Voiceability, which we made for the segments, CBF's segments grants. So we got $500 and we spent it on getting T-shirts made with that picture on there with the headphones. And now we've got this is actually my third group going on now, and we meet once a month and we make a radio show. It's on Z Digital once a month, and then they decided to call themselves the People of the Air. And so I've been working on trying to get more people involved who have disabilities at ZZZ. And the Z Digital component obviously requires a lot more training than just going on air and talking. So I'm working on ways to come about with that, and I'm going to be a CMTO trainer soon, so hopefully I'll be able to help that. And last year, straight out of the blue, surprisingly got the Tony Staley Award for our first radio project. So I guess that kind of boosted my ego and cemented my goals to do some research around this area. So that's enough from me. That's some nice pictures there of one of our radio groups. The People of the Air is my current group there. A couple of people are missing from that photo. It was about 8 of us. So we're going to hear from Caroline and Kate, who've been making Airwaves.
Come up there, or should you stay here?
Do we have microphones? We have microphones. So let's hear it for Caroline and Kate.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It's really nice to be here. Thank you, Kim, for inviting us, and thank you to the support of Tony from Eastside Radio. Yes.
We might start off with the video.
We might start off with the video. Yeah, this is just a short video. It was taken a while back of kind of how our program from the Wingate Foundation over in Sydney. We work as community service workers, so we support people with intellectual disabilities as our main job, and we've kind of fallen now into, not fallen, we kind of moved across into working in radio, and this is the program. Thanks.
Making Airwaves with the Wingate Foundation takes place at the Art Cafe in Rosebery, South Sydney. The project is about learning to make a radio show, exploring story and themes through voice movement and improvisation. These newly learned technical skills are broadcast by the participants on local community radio on International Day of People with Disability.
And back really loud.
Sports, yep.
Food.
What about weather?
Yeah, weather.
Yeah.
Food wasn't on there.
How many hours will we give?
I'm thinking
Half
about
an hour.
We've got half an hour.
Anybody remember what we use? A fist.
food.
It's a fist distance away from your mouth.
I like to be DJ.
Hello, my name is Sean. I'm here to learn speak on the radio.
I want to do sound effects on the radio.
Film reviewing on Eastside Radio. It's a movie about Mask, and it's a true story with, like I said on the thing, it's about a person with a disability.
Because she can't see him. Because she feels what's on the inside. And when you get to know someone, you don't look at the outside. Like, you only look at the inside.
So that's a little video about our program that was made a number of years ago now.
It's changed a little bit since then, but
Yeah.
we'll let you know.
Yeah. So we feel that the benefits of having a program such as Making Airwaves, first and foremost, are for the participants themselves. They gain so much confidence from the broadcasts and having an opportunity to express themselves in the media. Often people with an intellectual disability are severely underrepresented in the community and don't often get a voice to express themselves. So the participants that we generally work with are not necessarily looking to pursue a career in radio, but rather having an opportunity to have a voice and say something that they want to say for the first time and be heard on a platform through radio. Often people with a disability are spoken for rather than allowing themselves to speak with their voice. And another positive outcome is for the listeners of the program. They're finally given a chance to hear a voice, stories and ideas that they wouldn't traditionally have access to. I know the listeners from the program get so much joy and get such an insight from hearing from the participants themselves, as opposed to being spoken about in a way that perhaps I am and we are right now. Unfortunately, none of the participants could make it up to Sydney, but we respect them and what they have to say so much because we get so much out of listening to them. So that's how we feel the benefits are. Yeah.
And the program has come a long way since the video that you just saw, which was made in 2012, I think. We've been doing back-to-back shows for about 3 years. The program runs for 8 weeks, and then there's a half-an-hour broadcast at the end of it. But it has had its challenges. One of the biggest challenges we face with the program is reaching a wider audience. We need more support from local and national community stations to get on board with broadcasting the show and promoting the program. And what we're striving to achieve is ultimately inclusion. That's what Making Airwaves is all about, including people on the fringes of society, to be on a platform that can be heard all around Australia.
And moving forward with our program, a lot has changed since the beginning of the program in 2012, where that video you just watched was made. Like Caroline was just saying, we've had continuous 8-week programs running all year with the support of Eastside FM, who has happily aired our programs each 8 weeks. Tony has taken on editing and producing the programs and getting us in to do the recordings with all of the participants. We now, in the past few months, have gained some funding, and we now have our own recording studio at the Wingate Foundation. So we're now doing all of our recordings in-house, which is fabulous. So that allows the participants to feel really comfortable in a space where they can record it. We now have learned how to edit, which has taken some time, but we're getting there. And we actually have a documentary that we've just created through the Radio National documentary series.
National Features documentary series with CR and CBAA.
So,
Tony Smith, so he started with producing the programs and editing the programs and all of that and airing them on 89.7 FM in Sydney. And now that we have our own studio, we produce it, but Eastside FM is really fundamental and important to Making Airwaves program because that is our main source, our only source of being aired. So Eastside FM has really made it possible. Yeah.
And also we're now creating podcasts, so they're shorter segments for the participants who can really focus in on what it is, like doing their own thing rather than being part of a bigger group. And they're much shorter, likely to be within 5 minutes or 10 minutes or however long it is that they want to talk, rather than it being a full half an hour program.
And our aim is we'd like to see a larger representation of people with intellectual disabilities in community radio, which is what this is all about today. We hope that the doors will open wider for this often underrepresented part of the community. As we know, they have a lot to say. We hope that Making Airwaves can be part of the catalyst for this change alongside the wonderful people hosting this workshop with us today. We're going to be handing out some flyers later on. If you want to find out a little bit more, you can head to our Facebook page. We update it quite frequently. And if you have any questions, we're going to be around for the rest of the day. So we'd love to answer them.
Thank you.
I guess I forgot to mention that my whole idea for being involved in radio with people with intellectual disabilities was also social inclusion. That sometimes other counsellors at Wild say to me, if only everybody in this group had just one friend. And so by running the radio groups, we've provided an opportunity for them to have friends because they don't have anyone to talk to, and so they tend to sometimes make bad friends. So this is an opportunity for everyone to talk about their experiences, and in a safe environment. It's good that we have social workers there, I think, because the group I work with in particular have been through a fair bit of abuse, so that sometimes does come up. So we have to talk about that. But they just love the opportunity, and I let them lead the show, really. They decide who they're going to interview and what they're going to ask them. So we often ask questions like, what sort of pets do you have, and what music do you like? And it's always lots of fun. And we do this YouTube DJing thing because we don't actually get access to a real studio. So I take the portable studio. I've got a little portable studio in a suitcase, and we try to simulate a radio studio environment, I guess. I have a dream of turning our storeroom into an accessible studio at Triple Z one day. Anyway, what have I done with this slideshow? Yep. Is that right? Yep. Next up, we're going to hear from Helen, who's been at 3CR for quite a while and been involved in a lot of shows, I think, but I think that she can probably speak for herself. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, everybody. Hi, I'm Helen Gwilliam. I'm a volunteer at 3CR Community Radio here in Melbourne. I've been a volunteer programmer and trainer there for nearly 10 years. I'm a member of the Committee of Management and also identify as a person with disability. 3CR, as I hope many of you know, is a radio station here in Melbourne which has been broadcasting since 1976. And it's committed to giving a voice to people who don't have meaningful access to mainstream media. And so throughout the past 40 years, consistent with that, we have prioritised programming by people with disability, as we have with other groups who find it difficult to get their voices heard, as part of our commitment to social justice radio. The group you can see there up in the photo, up on the slide, this is one of our longest running shows that focuses on disability and self-advocacy. It's called Raising Our Voices. It's a show presented by members of an organisation called AMIDA, which is focused on independence around accommodation primarily, but they also advocate around transport, abuse, escaping institutions, all of the things that have been social justice struggles for people with disability over the past decades. We've got a number of other shows that focus explicitly on people with disability and are produced and presented by people with disability. So we have a show called Brainwaves that's led by people from the Mental Illness Fellowship. We've got a show called Small Talk that's led by people from the Short Statured Association. We've got a couple of other shows that are focused on current affairs and music. And the consistent thing I think about programmes with disability at 3CR is that we're all self-advocates for our own personal rights and also collectively for the rights of people with disability, and that's really what 3CR, I guess, brings to that particular perspective on disability in radio. As well as having that history, in 2009, for the first time, we celebrated the International Day of People with Disability on the 3rd of December with 12 hours of programming, with all content by people with disability. It was a slightly insane undertaking that at the time, if we'd thought 12 hours, we might not have done it that way. So we put out this massive call to the community and said, does anyone want to be on radio? And then it was just like, ah. So we had about 70 individuals and 20 different organisations we collaborated with that year, and it was huge. And it became a bit of an event, and so we've done it ever since. And every year we dedicate that day of broadcasting to disability issues presented by and for people with disability. And we'll just play you a few grabs of audio from some of our shows, Disability Day shows.
My name is Amanda Hisco, and I am the foundation member of Raising Our Voices program, where we'll be bringing the proud voices of self-advocates.
This is a first for me. The lovely voice that I have today is an interpreter, a sign language interpreter. So she's been watching me sign, and it's been great. So don't assume just because a deaf person is deaf, they can't be interviewed on radio. They can.
Australia has to do better for Aboriginal people with disabilities. Australia has to do better for women with disabilities. Australia must close institutions that are still open. And people in sheltered workshops are paid unfair wage. That must stop now.
You're listening to a 3CR 855 AM on International Day of Persons with what they call it disabilities. I don't.
To give credit, that's Anthony. I love that grab. Yeah, so we've just moved to the next slide. So, I mean, that's kind of what we try and do. We try and give people their voice, but it is in the context of 3CR, which is really looking at social justice. And as other members of the panel said, it's really focusing about being heard in our own voices. It's not, unless it's with the consent of the person with disability, mediated through carers or support workers or family. It's really about our voice and what our concerns and our interests. One of the, there's a risk of doing a programme on the International Day could be kind of tokenish and a one-day-a-year event, and we try to avoid that. But one of the benefits of having an event-based drive to include people with disability is that, well, we found anyway, it's made disability issues much more visible in the station, just as general current affairs stories that should be covered, as musicians and performers and actors and poets and activists and people who are concerned about environment and housing and all that, same as everybody else. It's really become much more accessible, I think, to other programmers without disabilities who see people around the station, have a chat and go, well, come on my show and talk about the things that we're both interested in. I think it's really not, it's not a difficult thing to just say we're willing. If you want to build inclusion and have more people with disability in your radio station, just say that you're willing. People will absolutely turn up and do it. You've got to be prepared when the people do turn up to let them lead the way and let them say what they want to say and do what they want to do. But that's really how it works. There's just a couple more pictures just to show you. So if you just move to the next one. That's Cameron, who was a bit of a star of one of our broadcasts. He's every bit the bass player and too cool for school, and just kind of ruled that particular session. And so we get a lot of music performers. There's a very big music disability network in Melbourne, and if you tap into that, that's an enormous source of just fantastic programming. And that's Lee, who had a great story to tell one year. He's been a newspaper seller for about 20-odd years on the corner of Flinders Street, and had the typical story of basically pushed into institutions, unable to get work, never really had an opportunity, lots of training, never a job, and had a job trying to force newspapers onto people who were not buying them anymore. So he had a great story to tell, and you can always find those people if you say, we want to hear from you. So that's it for 3CR. Yeah, another celebration. So lots of music also helps. There's lots of ways of reaching out to the community that way.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Bernadette Young. Back in the beginning of the slideshow here, I'll just go back. This lady in the middle here at the top is Alicia, one of the community correspondents that Bernadette's worked with, and I guess you'll talk about her at some point. I'll just go back. I should have fixed that one up.
Yeah, definitely. I'd like to start generally by talking about the ABC as a whole. A couple of things that we do, as the ABC does, I probably shouldn't say that I am the ABC, to accommodate staff members who might have disabilities. We are lucky compared to many community radio stations that we do have a lot more funding than most community radio stations. So we have been able to have things like movable desks, so that if people use wheelchairs, they can lower their desks and still work like the rest. And then even our panels in our studios can be raised or lowered, so that if you have a presenter or guests in wheelchairs, then they can still panel their own programs. We do also have a staff member in Brisbane who isn't terribly mobile. He doesn't use a wheelchair, but he isn't able to walk long distances, so he gets around the office on a Segway, and we have specific Segway parking zones all across the building for him to park his Segway and zip around on that thing. So those are a couple of things that, every station can accommodate people with disabilities if you think about it. Yes, sometimes they will require a bit of money, but some can be quite cheap options. I wanted to talk specifically and use an example of a video of a fantastic journalist in Triple J in Sydney called Naz Campanella, and I think this video just shows really nicely what you can do if you're a bit innovative to include people in your staff or volunteers within your organisation that initially might think, oh, that's too difficult to do radio. In her instance, they made some accommodations and rejigged the technology, and I think it's really innovative what they've done.
More evidence given at an abuse inquiry. The voice is calm and confident. G'day, Naz Campanella with Triple J News. But what Triple J listeners across the country don't know is that this newsreader can't see one word of the script she's delivering. 24-year-old Naz Campanella is blind.
The federal government's decision to scrap the promised increase.
Not only that, she can't read Braille. So Naz Campanella presents 3-minute news bulletins on the hour
by listening to an audio translation of copy through her headphones
The senior New South Wales policeman who blew the whistle on...
and then repeating what she hears.
The senior New South Wales policeman who blew the whistle on allegations of a cover-up of child sexual abuse has admitted he lied to colleagues because he was suspicious of their motives.
I am reading about a second or two behind. It's hard because the speech program has an American accent and it's a sort of computerised voice, so there's that to contend with, and it pronounces things sort of incorrectly most of the time.
She doesn't just present the bulletins but produces them as well, operating the panel with the help of strategically placed Velcro dots while listening to 4 different streams of audio.
In the headphones I can hear myself.
The federal opposition leader says
I can hear the speech program telling me what to say.
The federal opposition leader says he expects...
I can hear the audio grabs that I have to play on air.
In the end, they will understand that we're a team.
And then on top of that, I can hear a clock telling me how much time I've got left to go.
10.
It's fine.
So I think, most of us in radio think that we do a pretty good job and can, deal with lots of difficulties, but having 4 streams of audio in your headphones all at once, I couldn't do that. And so similar to that grab just before, people call it a disability. Nah, she's doing more than what most of us in this room could in that very specialised field. So I wanted to move on to talk about the Community Correspondent program, which is what Kim spoke about and the main reason why I'm here. So Community Correspondent is a program that the station I work for in Brisbane, 612 ABC Brisbane, which is ABC local radio, has been running for almost 3 years now. And essentially it's a sort of citizen journalism project where we get people from different communities to tell their own stories, and we broadcast that on ABC local radio in Brisbane. So people from different communities, such as different geographic areas, so different places around the Brisbane area, but more importantly, different, demographic communities, so Indian, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, transgender, LGBTIQ, but also people with disabilities. And we've had 2 community correspondents covering the area of people with disabilities. One, Alicia, who was the photo up there, who has Parkinson's herself, and another lady who was the carer of a daughter with very severe disabilities. And so the whole program, it didn't just cater specifically to people with disabilities and giving them the voice, but it catered to giving the voice of all people from all communities whose voices aren't heard on mainstream media. And that's the whole ethos of the program. And so I coordinated that program for 2 years. And in the approach we took to give people from non-mainstream groups who identify, in different communities, and getting them a voice on air, we did a lot of things to enable that. So we did a lot of training and basic radio skills. But I think the important thing to think about is that what we did is make sure that there were different options for everything, so that no matter what needed to be done, there was a different option that might work for different people. So if people weren't able to come into the ABC buildings for training, whether it be because they had mobility issues or just because they worked or had children to look after if they were single parents. So I recorded all of my training sessions and I put it online as podcast forms. Simple things like that. And the way that they submitted their radio stories to go to air, they didn't actually come into our studios to do it. They used their smartphones. Basically, most people have smartphones these days or can access them, or very cheap audio recorders. And they uploaded them to things like SoundCloud or Dropbox and sent them in that way. So it enabled them to do their interviews or tell their stories at a time that suited them, at a speed that suited them, and in a way that suited them as well, so that there was no barriers in that way, or very few barriers in that way for people to get involved and tell their stories. Just more broadly as well, a couple of tips that the ABC generally uses to enable other people to be involved in our general radio broadcast, aside from the Community Correspondent program. There are some great ways to use technology to enable people to be involved in your station. We have a Comrex kit, a portable broadcast sort of tight line unit, but cheap phone apps like Report It. People can download onto their phones, and it enables you to get studio quality broadcasting from anywhere where there's a 3G or 4G connection. Many people will already be using that kind of technology, but some community stations might not have thought to invest in that kind of thing. One way that we use that is we had a guest who's a quite a high-profile Paralympian, Carney Liddell, and we interviewed her a few weeks ago. Wanted to get her in studio to get that studio quality, but she was pregnant and couldn't come in. She uses a wheelchair, so we actually sent our reporter out with the Comrex unit, had her sitting at home in her lounge chair, and did the interview that way. And that's just an example of being able to get, even if people need to be wanting to be presenting shows but can't come into your program, you can either get that technology out there using that kind of thing, or using their smartphone, installing home studios. There are lots of options for you to make your studios more accessible for guests and for presenters as well. And the last thing I just wanted to say is, to get more people with disabilities involved in your station, you need to make it accessible before they join, not when you have somebody come to you and say, hey, I want to volunteer, because you're going to turn a lot of people off. I remember when I started at 4ZZZ, I think it was, I don't know if it was the whole studio, but at least the toilets weren't accessible via wheelchair. Of course, you're not going to get any volunteers of people who use wheelchairs, because they can't use the toilet in the station. Eventually that got fixed and was made wheelchair accessible. But you need to be starting to think about these things in your station before you get people involved. Otherwise, they're just going to turn away and go elsewhere, and you're not going to get that engagement, even if you want it, even if you put the call out, because they literally are barred from participating.
Thank you. So let's hear it for Bernadette. I was hoping now that we might open up the floor to questions, and I also have some questions that I want to ask people in the audience. So Andrew here has the microphone. Does anybody want to ask a question of our panellists? We've got somebody there, Andrew.
Just I feel like it might be a comment more than a question. I think it's 600,000 Australians with disabilities are living below the poverty line. So I'm really aware of the politics in regards to people with disabilities and inclusion. And I'm reflecting on this panel right now about how important this panel is and where it sits in the program of this conference right now, alongside some very important sessions like the digital radio session, for instance. So I'm reflecting on the CBAA's priorities right now and how it perceives the importance of this. And you know, I've been thinking about this issue a lot for a long time, and I guess that the few things that I'm aware of now is the CBAA needs to take more leadership when it comes to people with disabilities. There hasn't been an Auslan interpreter at the conference this year. It would be very difficult if you were in a wheelchair to be here at this venue. There's not an award for people with disabilities. There's an award in Indigenous broadcasting, in youth broadcasting, in excellence in music broadcasting, but not with disabilities. But also even on boards, getting that experience onto boards as well. And so I think that this is great. I'm really worried that a lot of people here are the people who drink the Kool-Aid and are in this conversation. Of course, 3CR is exceptional at this. Like, there's no doubt about that. Actually, many stations are not accessible, have never been accessible, don't even have the tools to begin that conversation, and the peak body is nowhere to be seen, I think, in that conversation. So I just want to reflect on that. And the other thing which I wanted to, and I wanted to ask you both about, the program sounds great. I was thinking about the notion of inclusion, and I wanted you to talk about some of the benefits of having your own studio and also some of the disadvantages of having your own studio.
Advantages, well, we're lucky that our studio is inside of Wingap Foundation, which is a day program facility for people with intellectual disabilities, and it's all structured so that it's very accessible, and our studio is inside of that, and our studio is accessible as well. Another benefit is that we can make as many shows as we want, really. If we want to do 3 shows in a row, if we want to do an extra show, we just sort of don't have to depend on any outside sources in terms of producing and editing it.
Yeah, the benefit of having is that we can do it with the guys there, but the biggest challenge for us is opening it up to a broader community. It's really hard to let people know that this exists. It's one of the biggest challenges for us, is saying, you know, we have this facility available, but we need support people, we need families, we need the community to allow it to be shared to the individuals to say, hey, you've got this opportunity, because it's very hard with people with intellectual disabilities to have access to even know about it. They need support people there to say, hey, this exists. Would you like to come and be involved in this program? Check out the website. This is how it runs. Give us a call. Having Eastside there to have it as a platform has been the only way that people within the eastern suburbs of Sydney to hear the program. But we would love it if other community radio stations wanted to take it on.
And you asked what's one negative part of using our own studio. First thing that springs to mind is we are not audio engineers. We barely know what we're doing half the time. We're support workers who are running a radio program for people with disabilities. So every single time we go into the studio, there's something that we don't know, a problem that we don't know how to fix. Yeah. And so running this studio, we've had a lot of help setting it up, but running it on a day-to-day basis, we don't have anyone to ask questions to. So it's tricky. Yeah.
Another question?
Acknowledge that, because the comment you made there, because I think what enables this to happen at 3CR, that it is community-based, and it is the community of 3CR. It's not about let's do disability. It's 3CR as a community. There's no absolute reason why we wouldn't. And so some of the nuts and bolts issues around access are in some ways, even though we also run off the smell of an oily rag, more easily fixed, because you put the word out to a very long-standing community and people will turn up and do something. So I think it does come back to creating the community around it that will make it happen. If you're community radio, there must be a community that you're building who is willing to come and put in their hard yards, I think. And you should put the hard word on them.
I actually have a comment to make about that too, because I don't have a studio, and we do our radio projects in wherever we can find a room that's not near a train line or something like that, and I have to carry it around in a suitcase. So there's a lot of onus on me to be providing everything and doing a lot of the work, which is not sustainable, I think. I can't have a day off because I've got to be there to manage all the tech, and I'm not very good at that anyway. So as much as I love 4ZZZ, I think that, like you say, with the CBAA, it's not a priority at ZZZ either. And we've only, how long have we been around? 40 years. We only got a wheelchair ramp a couple of months ago. So that's how long it's taken. I think you might have had another comment.
You're just going to finish a comment.
Yeah, I guess that, when we talk about the politics of this, and who brought up what's her name, Carney Liddell? Carney Liddell. Yeah, is a great example. Like this, for now, we talk about 600,000 people who are below the poverty line. Carney Liddell's a great example of someone who could be presenting the 7 o'clock news right now on the ABC. And she isn't. She's a community correspondent. And this is the gap that needs to be addressed as well. And what I can hear here is a complexity between, on one hand, therapy and community development work, which is extremely important, which we describe as people's confidence and that, which is great. And then that might result in a half an hour program at the end of 8 weeks, and it might need to happen in a studio away from a station. I think that, what's clear as well is the other side of this is the back-to-back story, where, in arts and theatre practice now, It's not uncommon to have the main show in a major festival to be made by people with intellectual disabilities, and for the framing of that work to be exceptional. And I think that, again, this is what community media needs to demonstrate some leadership around this, and what you've described with 3CR is great, and both things are valid, but we need to have a much deeper conversation about how we achieve deeper outcomes on both ends, because it's going to be us who shifts the mainstream on this. It will be community media who will produce another Carney Liddell, another Stella Young, the type of person who could be seen on the 7 o'clock news, and that's really important for people with disabilities.
Yeah, thanks.
Can I just really quickly clarify? So Carney Liddell isn't a community correspondent. She was a guest on our local ABC local radio program. But funny you should say that. She actually has been an ABC local radio paid presenter before. Now I think she works for commercial radio in Brisbane, so she's sort of fallen off our books a bit for that. But no, definitely. And speaking from, I guess, the mainstream media background that I have in ABC, that it's actually not a huge priority for us in terms of diversity, and it's interesting you should say that you find that that's the same thing in community radio, that within the ABC there's a push at the moment for diversity within gender, within cultural background, within Indigenous people, when you're talking about staff, and as well talent and story topics, but that actually isn't our priority at the moment. And so it's interesting that you've noticed that there's a similar, it's just not the priority here within community radio as well, so that's an interesting perspective.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Conrad. I'm from Vision Australia Radio. I've been in community radio for a while, but I'm quite new to the radio for print handicapped sector, and particularly with Vision Australia, our community of interest are people with low vision or who are blind. One of the things that really has surprised me since I've been with Vision Australia for the last 6 months is the very, 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 very small amount of people from our community of interest that are presenting on our airwaves across the network, and that's right across RPH stations as well. There's a real lack of representation even at this conference from people from RPH, and while that's obviously it is everyone's choice to be here, I am interested to go back and find out why that is. But I guess moving forward, we're making quite a conscious effort to try and bring our community of interest on air, because I think that's what we should be doing anyway. There is a little bit of resistance to that in some areas, and I think a lot of that has to do with a perception of it being too hard. And so one of the things I'd really be interested in hearing from the panel is there a standard, a template, a place that we can actually go to direct people to show them how easy it is to make your station, your studios accessible?
There is an organisation in Queensland called Access Arts, and they give people a lot of advice about how to make a building accessible. I'm not sure what happens in other states. Does anyone know?
But is that, I guess, more so in relation to radio?
The technology or
the whole
training.
thing. I think the studio environment is so specific. I'm really looking for some guidance on that. I've reached out to other stations and I've got bits and pieces, but I can't seem to find a central point.
I'll show you something that I have in mind. I don't think we're going to have time to do this because we've got like 8 minutes to go. But I've set up this website, the Community Radio Inclusion Support Project, where I'm hoping to have a place where everyone can come and contribute their information about what you're talking about, what technology exists, where you can get it, where you can get training for people with disabilities, how to make your station accessible, and that it's only got a few things on it now. Also, content people have produced, what shows are out there, and hopefully form some kind of collaboration between people and stations that are doing this. So I've got a list out the front there if you want to put your name down and you'd like to contribute to this project. And I've also talked to Emma Couch, who said that the CBAA might be able to put some resources into this. So that would be really great if that happened. But like you're saying, you have to look hard to find that information. I had to train myself in the shortcuts for using Audacity for a person with vision impairment. I'm not very good at using it that way, I might add.
Yeah, if I can just jump into that, I think it would be great to develop some kind of list that everybody could share of technologies for different types of needs and access, I think you will find it's very tailored. A lot of the stuff that we have done for 3CR, particularly people, programmers with low vision, is very much tailored to their level of vision. So we've got screen readers or larger keyboards and braille notes on the panels and things like that, but it does depend very much on what that person does and how much they use that studio. So you're welcome to go around and have a look at that anytime if you want to. But I think it is very tailored, and I think some sharing of that would be incredibly useful to develop some standard around it. And I guess, you know, I listen to the kind of it's too hard, and frankly I've got no patience with it at all. I mean, you'd expect me to say that, but you know, I think, you know, for all of us with different disabilities and differences, you hear that your whole life and that gets boring quite quickly. It's not too hard. Just try or listen, maybe. And, you know, because most of the time we're pretty adaptable. You know, we'll get on with it. So I think you've really just got to be willing to work with that person to start with, and then build the community of knowledge and share it is probably the best thing we can do. But you've just got to expect to get in there. I don't think we can say it's too hard to anybody or accept it's too hard from anybody else, because it's just not.
One last question. We've nearly time up, so.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I've forgotten your name from
That's Helen.
Helen. My name is Stella. I'm at Vision Australia Radio as well. So do you think people, especially with 3CR or anyone else who might know, were people that you have who have a disability, when they came to 3CR, was there a kind of a call out, or did they go to 3CR because they knew it was a place they could go to?
Oh, to be honest, I think both happen just over time. There's a lot of community networks with 3CR because there's so many volunteers who are involved in all sorts of things. So I think both happen. Is there a short answer on that? I think that the call out helped us build things for a newer generation as much as anything else. But it's been going on for years.
Together and trying to making their voices heard. So the disability activist community of Melbourne was there at the start from 1976. So no one brought them in. They were there, and they've been foundation members of the station. So when the call out went out to people to create media for, by people for people, they were there at the beginning. And if they're not there in your station, the question is why? What's happening?
That's what I was trying to figure out. There has to be a welcome, there has to be a place that people can be involved in something.
Yeah, and that's what the goal of this is, to try and give people ideas on how they can facilitate that. And one of the things that I've tried to do is go out to organisations and do it with them, because it's not easy for a lot of people to come to stations, and I find that people who want to volunteer at Triple Z are often put to the bottom of the list, and it's hard to find someone who will mentor them, and that's definitely needed in a generalist station that doesn't have much of a disability involvement at all, really. We've got 5 minutes, so maybe we've got time for one more person.
Thank you. Just to sort of continue on from what Helen was saying about people thinking that it's too hard. Answering your emails every day, that's bloody hard. Doing grant acquittal reports, that's hard. Having to make sure people turn up to do their programs, that's hard, day in, day out. But when you open up the door and you let these people in with disabilities into your station, that is just pure joy. It is the highlight of your year, your day, whatever. You want to feel good about what you do, open up your station to people with disabilities and love your job again, because you've never felt so much pride in giving a voice to these people and allowing them to talk in the ways that they want to be heard. It's just an amazing thing, and it's great that there are as many people here today to take this back to their stations and to increase how many people around the sector are doing that. I just wanted to say that. But Helen, a question I did have though was, when you made it very open to more people to come and be a part of 3CR, and you were influxed with so many numbers, how did you manage having so many people involved that day?
Where did they come from?
And do they come on their own, or do they have carers and support with them too?
Oh, it was a huge mix. It was a completely bonkers thing to do that first year. and that was because of a grant. Because there was another broadcast I'd heard that was a 24-hour one. I thought, we should do 12 hours. That sounds all right. I was like, we just responded to people. And some people kind of knocked themselves out quite quickly because it did become clear that it was really driven by something perhaps wasn't really very consistent with our programming. We had things that were, I guess, more towards the therapeutic end rather than actually some things that would fit with our audience. So that knocked some proposals out. So we basically took people's proposals, like why do you want to talk about this and why is our audience going to be interested in it? Some people came to the station, some people couldn't. So one young woman was on a ventilator, so we went to her. She makes music using her computer, and so we went to her. There was another young guy who also was on a ventilator, and we went to his house. So we're volunteers, and we fit in as much as we could, basically. But we didn't do that big a call out again. We didn't really need to after that. We'd built a large community. But it wasn't actually that hard. People really were keen to do something. So we found once you put, we've got those very robust recorders. So once you put that in somebody's hand and said, if it goes up that high, you're going to, be peaking, just look at that red light. And people were pretty happy to come in and record themselves, go take something to an event. It wasn't that hard to get people going.
That's all we've got time for today, really. Thank you so much for coming, and I would encourage you all who have opinions on this, which I hope you all do, to tick the I want to be interviewed box on my form down there and give me your email address and I will chase you up, because 1 hour was clearly not enough. I don't think it ever was going to be. I'd like to hear some clapping for this wonderful panel and their wealth of information. And there's the links to our various websites if you want to follow it up. Thank you.
Welcome back to the live streaming of the CBAA conference, and I am joined with Carolyn and Kate, Carolyn and Kate, and we've just had a lovely chat on stage about what you guys are doing, and it is absolutely amazing to hear. And I'd love for everyone, to get a second chance to hear about your special project that you're doing, Airwaves.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Yeah, so it's a program called Making Airwaves that runs out of Sydney, and we support people with intellectual disabilities to have a voice on the radio, and we work producing shows out of Eastside FM 89.7.
Yeah, that's so wonderful to hear. Now, were you friends before you started doing the program, or was it a program that brought you together?
It brought us together, yeah. I mean, we work so intimately all the time now that we're pretty good friends now, but we didn't know each other before then. We've just been working a lot on the program.
Yeah, we expressed our interest at work, that we were interested in working in radio, and then therefore that's why we've gone ahead and done it. Otherwise, we'd probably be doing something completely different at work now.
That's so cool to hear. One of the key themes that I've heard throughout the conference is, engaging with people, making, new friendships, and I feel like that would be like one of the benefits to come out of the program. Would you say that what, some of the benefits are?
Yeah, some of the benefits of working in the program, participants being involved, is gaining confidence, having their voice heard on the radio, and also for the people listening at home on their radios to the program that finishes, is really just such a wonderful sound to hear through the radio, that of a voice you're not really used to hearing. So I think our program opens up a lot of opportunities for the participants themselves as well as people listening at home.
Yeah. And so for people listening at home, how can people, get involved more?
In Making Airwaves, or with disability in radio in general. With Making Airwaves, you can contact us on our Facebook page on Making Airwaves. Just search it in Facebook, and we're happy to answer any questions. It's a bit tricky to sum it in, but pretty much we are always looking for new participants, and we're always looking for people to help with the program and teach us their skills, because we're support workers first, radio workers second. So we're always looking for people to get involved.
Also, if you want to hear any of the programs, you can go onto YouTube or just type in Making Airwaves, and all of our past programs are online that you can have a listen to, and it's a bag of fun. We have heaps of fun and really interesting stories, and we touch on some pretty serious stuff sometimes. So check out Making Airwaves on Facebook or online or on YouTube.
It's so wonderful to hear, and it's great to hear, moving forward as well, that, people are engaging, in different social media outlets in a way to engage, all different types of people, and it's so beautiful to hear.
You kind of take care of the Facebook page a lot more than I do.
We tried Twitter, trying to do Instagram. We learned a bit about Snapchat at the conference today, so we might start Snapchatting. It's really cool to incorporate all these platforms and be around, like just in the presentation that we just did, being with such a group of passionate people about disability in radio. It's just, we might be small, but we are strong, and we're really passionate about what we do.
Yeah. Well, it's been great to meet you today, and I wish you all the best, and make sure you check out the Airwaves project.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.